I learned to have two different methods of recording things because technology, right?
This sounds like a lesson that was learned through hard experience.
Man, 20 minutes worth of a conversation that just went off
Oh
into the
boy,
ether. It
I've
was a good
been on
conversation
that.
too. Probably the best one I've ever had in my entire life.
Yep, I've been on that. The other side of that, where like, let's have this conversation again. It's never as good the second time. You can't
Right.
recapture it.
Yeah. Let me get my camera somewhere where it looks like it's actually pointing at me. I've got the massive first world problem of having an ultra wide monitor that if I were to put like the camera on top of it, it would be like all the way up here and I'd be like, given the MySpace angle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Thank you so much for meeting with me. Um,
I'm happy to do it. Thank you
I
for asking
wanted
me to
to
jump on.
before we started talking though, I wanted to give a full disclosure in that I believe we've actually done business together back when you were running Project Wonderful. If
Yes. Okay, so I recognize the name. It's like, why is this ringing a bell? That's
Yeah,
great.
I've got a pretty unique last name. And I like all the sites I was running back then. They're still steaming along, and I still pine for the days that Project Wonderful was around and doing its thing because
Thank
it was
you.
such a simple platform to use, and it wasn't overly complicated and geared towards the people
Yeah.
that have doctorates and data scientists, data science and analysis and. Uh,
Yeah, I miss it too. I was sad to shut down. I was sad that people sort of stopped visiting websites. The shape the internet has taken over the past decade has been, in
yeah,
my opinion, suboptimal.
yeah,
But yeah, I miss it too.
lots of really pretty walled gardens that they don't share their information with anyone. But
Yep.
yeah, so like I also had that same thing where I was like, now do I know his name because I've read his work? Is it because of the comic? Is it because of the web comic? Is it because of his books? Like is he just like a super famous guy that I just like know his name because he's out there? And then I was like, I'm gonna do a Gmail search, and I've had the same Gmail account for going
Yeah.
on 20 years now. So thank God
Oh,
for being a
Project
digital
Wonderful
hoarder.
guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
mine's the same
right.
way. That's awesome.
And that shut down just because like it wasn't doing anything anymore.
There were a couple of reasons. It was getting harder and harder to be able to monetize traffic people. Rates were dropping because traffic was dropping. And the thing that I would have probably done it for a bit longer. The thing that pushed over the edge was that the web host was moving facilities. And so I would have had to rebuild all of the servers from scratch and sign
Ew.
another 5-year lease agreement. And like it didn't make sense. It couldn't be done. I was like, I guess I have to shut this down. Which
Uh,
was sad because it was like it ran for 12 years. It was really good. And the hard part was for 12 years of my life, I was on call 24/7 because it was just me running everything.
mm-hmm.
Um, so it the funny Star Trek connection is initially I had a bunch of scripts that ran that checked to make sure everything's working fine. Are the ads loading? Is everything on the back end fine? Is the database not overloaded? All this stuff. If anything went wrong, it would send me a text message. And for that account, I had the text message be the TNG red alert noise.
Yeah.
And it was fine. It woke me up. And then after like a year or two, I was listening to a Star Trek podcast and they used that same noise to blurb out curse words. And suddenly I was like, why is my heart racing? Why am I tense? Oh, I
Right.
gave myself
PTSD.
PTSD for this sound effect. So I changed it to a very loud Bollywood song I'd never heard before, so I would
Oh,
not get
good.
association with it. It was wild. Like I was sitting there being like, "What is happening? Why is?" And I realized, oh, it's just I did this to myself.
Oh, that is so unfortunate. Like,
Yeah.
have you disassociated the two things now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank God.
It's been a while, but yeah, I would like that. That noise goes up at 3 in the morning, and I would be like, okay, I need to go fix this, and it's just me, and I need to get up, diagnose the problem, solve the problem, do
Mm-hmm.
it all at 3 in the morning. So it was, a lot of fun, but very much fun for when you're in your 20s and early 30s,
Right.
less
Yeah,
so
I
as you
feel
age.
that. Yeah, I feel that as well.
Yeah.
Because I used to care when my websites would go down for like longer than like 5 minutes. It's like
Mhm.
send me alert, got uptime bot telling me all these things, and now I'm like, you know what? No one uses the internet anymore. So if it goes down for 2 or 3 hours, I value my sleep a little more than the websites.
Yep. Yep. And
But
there's RSS of a copy and all that stuff.
mhm. And I'd like to think that Project Wonderful was just a couple years ago, but that was actually quite some time. Uh, Probably about 7 or 8 years ago now.
Has it been that long? Let me check. 2012?
That's when it ended.
That can't be right. 2015? Let's see. Wikipedia says it ended in 2018. Okay, good.
So it wasn't too wrong with that. Was just an off the cuff date. I didn't look it up beforehand, so I wasn't quizzing you.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's you've
6
been busy
years.
since then. You've written at least 2 books since then. I haven't really gone through your full um book
Book
catalog to see.
discography? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the word
yeah, I
for
was.
it.
Yeah, it's like your library. Your
Yeah.
I was gonna say your discography, but that's a little
Back
different.
catalog sounds fancy.
It does. Yeah, right. That sounds
Yeah.
like we're academic. Yes, a back catalog. And you've been running the dinosaur comic since before Facebook, if I'm
2003, yeah, predates
yeah,
YouTube, predates social
yeah.
media, uh, predates a lot of things.
And it is the paradoxically one of like the most interesting web comics that's out there, and also the how do I say this polite way, like the most dependable on which art assets are going to be used.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
How has that been kicking along for so long? Like what kind of audience do you have for that, and what are they finding from it?
I mean, I think it helps that it is something that I know how to do. I've been doing it for 23 years.
Hmm.
Um, it's something I enjoy doing. It's something that's bite-sized. It's not a huge commitment. If it took me 3 hours a day to do, I probably still wouldn't be doing it. But it doesn't take 3 hours a day every comic, so that is a great benefit. Um, and it's where I learned how to write, I think. A lot of writing is the great thing about any art, especially writing, is that you can't do it without getting better at it. There's no way I could write
Hmm.
dinosaur comics in 23 years and not be better at writing dialogue, right? Like, because
Right.
that's all the comic is dialogue. So it's something I really enjoy, and I'm pleased that people still enjoy it. And you see sometimes people be like, "Oh, it's actually funny." Sometimes I'll see like, "Oh, Ryan, isn't he the Squirrel Girl guy?" Or in your case, the Project Wonderful guy. Sometimes it'll be the Dinosaur Comics ad. Like, I haven't thought about that for 15 years. Like, well, it's still there. You can still read more of them. They're waiting for you. Um, so it's fun. It's something I enjoy, and it's something that I've been lucky enough to get to keep doing.
Right. Yeah. It's also one of those that it's not like XKCD where if you just see the outline of it, like scrolling past, you're like, oh, I've seen that one before because he's like doing the thing with the Jaguar in the chair and the yeah, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah. But whereas this one, you're like, oh, I'm actually gonna have to read a couple words to see if I
Know if
remember it
I've
or
seen
not.
this one. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And I don't subscribe to it. I just like read it every time it comes across my
Comes
feed.
across your world.
Right. Which is it's one of those touchstones though that like you're like, oh yeah, that strip's still alive and going. And I'm sure it has its valleys and peaks of traffic, but
Mhm.
it continually like shows up, which is impressive to me as someone that's like been running my own sites for 20 years now.
Yeah.
Um, just like how randomly the internet can glom onto something, and you're like, oh wow, that they got 20,000 page views on that one comic today. Why? Well, it was because a cat fancy group out of like Turkey liked like what you were saying about the lives of cats or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's just why? I don't know. It's the internet. So you and I are talking today because I've got a website that is StarTrekBookClub.com.
I'm
That
familiar.
Star Trek site, and you had a mini series that was 3 issues long. Back
Yep.
in when was that? 22, and then it was collected in 23. And then IDW Paramount just announced that you're going to be doing an ongoing
Yes.
series,
Starting later this year, I believe.
and that's going to be after the release of the last season of Lower Decks, right?
Oh boy. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not 100% the scheduling, but I believe that's what's happening.
Right. So will it be its own self-contained thing, or is it going to be picking up after the adventures, or is that a no comment situation?
No, I will tell you, one of the great advantages, privileges of going to write a Lower Decks comic is you say, listen, Paramount, Mike McMahon, Heather Antos at IDW, I simply cannot write any of these books unless I can see the animatics for the upcoming seasons. And so I believe since season three, I've been able to see them. And it's great to make sure, like, see the arcs of the characters, make sure what you're writing lines up with that.
Hmm.
So I don't believe there's any. Oh, now I have to be careful what I say because it's stuff that's unseen. Um, Emotionally, the characters are where they are at in that season, so it all lines up. It should feel like this is all part of the same universe. That's something that Mike and I have talked a lot about, where we both really liked it when the tie-in stuff feels real and feels like
Hmm.
it matters. And so so much of what's there in the comic, you can, especially with the artist, close or keep your eyes open and imagine it as a version of the show. The voices are there, the characters are there, the reactions are there. So it should feel very familiar in the best way and not like a weird off-model version of things. Because I remember when I was a kid, I would read the Star Trek novels put out by Pocket Books, I believe.
Hmm.
And I was 12, 13. I had no idea how any of this stuff worked. And I would get really annoyed and mad that, I'd read this book and it would get details wrong about Data's processing capability or something. It's like, how could they get this wrong? Why don't they care as much as it about it as I care as much about it? And, as an adult looking back, you're like, okay, so this was a book published in season one of the show. And
Right.
I was reading it during season six. So of course things were not quite matched up. Everyone did the best job they could. There's
Right.
there's novels that came out before the show was even released, one of them, which is interesting just as an artifact to see like how things are going. There's an early Marvel comic for TNG that happened with season one stuff, and it's wild. Everyone is weird. They're all posed like X-Men. They're real muscly. So we're trying to make it feel accessible and familiar and not off model and weird.
Right. So for the new series that's coming up, and I'm only gonna say this once so that like I don't have to keep saying, but like if you can't say anything, just say no comment and we'll just
Sure, yeah.
keep rolling with it. But because one, I'm super excited about more lower decks content.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always happy when there's more printed stuff, regardless of how it's actually delivered. But uh, I know in the first one, the comic actually reminded me of when I used to read comics when I was a kid because my process then was read all the words, do the entire comic, and then go back, look at the art throughout the entire comic, and then do it a
Oh,
third
interesting.
time. Right. Yeah, so you get like the economy of like, hey, I spent $2 on this comic. I'm gonna read it as many times as I
Free
can.
passes.
Right.
I appreciate that as a writer because the comics
Right.
take months to produce and they're read in 30 seconds.
Right. But this one, I actually like I did that 4 times because it had the subtitles or subscript
Little
or
notes
whatever it
at the
was.
bottom of
Yeah,
the page. Yeah.
the editor notes. Are you going to be staying with that motif, like to have those in the future issues?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. One is comics is a not inexpensive hobby, and I like that we're literally cramming jokes in the margin. And the other is Mike McMahon really likes them. It was like, please keep doing them. And I was like, not a problem. Unless you put in extra jokes, I'm happy to do it.
Right, and it it does something with the way that Lower Decks does too, like visually, where there's just like every scene is just a masterpiece of like callbacks and homages and just like references to everything that's Trek, and it's a little more difficult to do it in the panels, like the 4 or 6 panels that you get on every page, and it's a lot easier to bring the Lower Decks feel for those jokes and those the winks and nods with those author's notes or editor's notes or whatever we're going to call them. But
Yeah, for me, it's almost a process of adaptation.
mhm.
I thought a lot about that. I did a graphic novel adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse Five, and there the process was the challenge, the idea, the story I told myself was I was an editor and I commissioned Kurt Vonnegut to write this comic book, and he delivered on to me this prose novel. It's like, this is wrong. This is not what we need. But how do I transform this into this comic book as if it was what it always intentionally meant to be? If this was a form it was always meant to take, what would it look like? And so I think when you're doing a tie into an anime show, it's sort of a similar process where you want it to feel like if you'd somehow never heard of Star Trek and never heard of Lower Decks, you won't read this comic and say, "Oh, what a good adaptation of a TV show." You'd say, "What a good comic!" Like you'd
Hmm.
want to feel like it stands on its own. It justifies itself, and it doesn't feel like you're missing something, like it's a lesser version of something else. And that may be just writer brain talking and trying to justify. But I think there's a difference when you approach the work as this is a tie-in to something versus this is going to try to make this be its own thing that stands on its own 2 feet while also being a tie into something.
Right. Yeah. And IDW specifically, and I'm not sure if it's like because of like their creative control or like how they guide their authors or like just who they pick to write their stuff. They're very good at doing that. Um, I know that like I stepped away from reading comic books for, about 10, 15 years when I was in college and getting married and, just going through all the life and
Sure.
everything. And then we happened to be at like Books a Million and they were selling like just like stacks of comics for $2 each. And they had just like dozens and dozens of Star Trek books there. So, and my wife was like, "Hey, didn't you used to read comic books?" I'm like, "Yeah, I used to." So
And
I
do
spent like a
again
hundred. Yeah,
now.
exactly. Like so, spent like $100 that night, and then like we
Oh
started going to
wow.
all these shows and everything. But the what got me back to Star Trek was IDW's adaptation of the Wrath of Khan, which
Mm,
felt exactly how you described your Kurt Vonnegut story adaptation, which is like this is just a good comic book. This isn't like an
yeah.
adaptation. Like they've taken the story and used the comic book format and like really done the story correctly for a comic book. Which, if you read comics during the 80s and 90s, Marvel and DC were pushing out their movie adaptations because you've got the script and all the story beats and it's a familiar product, so it's easy to sell to the people and like me that would buy every single one of them because
Yeah.
they were cheaper and more parentally approvable than like watching a movie over and over again. It's like, no,
Yep.
I'm
Reading
reading,
is
mom.
good.
Like, right, reading's
This is
good.
good for me.
Yeah, even if
Yeah.
it's the adaptation of Batman Returns.
Yep. Yeah, I read that book.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the this is going back further the 60s, the comics, classics illustrated comics, which were just
Mm,
like, here's, the Iliad done in comics. And there it was very much just like we'll have panels with a ton of words in them. And there's nothing in the text that makes it feel like this was meant to be comics, just feels like we crammed it into this new shape of a vessel. And that's what I always try to avoid, is not to feel like this is an adaptation of a different form, but if it was born in this medium, what does it do? Like, what can we do in this medium that we can't do anywhere else that'll
hmm.
make it feel like this is special and meant to be here? So it's a fun process. I think it's a process adaptation. I really enjoy it. And it's also, you can do stuff that you can't do as well on a motion medium like film or TV. Lower Decks, um, being animated, they have this tight limit on time.
Hmm.
And in comics, I have a page limit, yes, but I can change the amount of time I have in those pages by putting in fewer or more words. The panels take up more or less time in your mind. So there's ways to do stuff that you can only do in comics. Conversations and fight scenes are a classic example. In real
Hmm.
life, you can't really talk that much during a fight scene because a punch takes a half second. In comics, you can have a whole back and forth while they're just about to punch each other
Right.
or actually punching each other. So it's fun and interesting.
So, have you written any comic books outside of the Star Trek ones?
Yeah, yeah. I've done my first tie-in stuff was Adventure Time for Boom, and I've written
Okay.
Squirrel Girl, and I'm currently writing Fantastic Four for Marvel. And with Erica Henderson, my Squirrel Girl artist, we have a young adult book out called Danger and Other Unknown Risks, which is uh, a comic about a young woman who's told that she's fated to save the world, and her adventures trying to do that.
Uh,
So lots
yeah,
of working.
I actually did know that about the Squirrel Girl thing because I was reading off your accomplishments and writings to my wife, and she was quite excited about that because she loves the character.
Oh, nice. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
I miss her.
And yeah. But So in the comic book methodology, do you have a preferred way of communicating the story to the artist? Like, is it a collaborative effort, or is it more directed from one way or the other?
Yeah, I always skew more collaborative, and that's because in my very first book for someone else to draw, which was Adventure Time #1, the artists were Braden Lamb and Shelley Paroline, and I'd written the script that was like, okay, panel one, we've got 6 panels, they're laid out like this, and here's the scene description, here's what they say. And then when I got back pencils, the rough version of the pages from the artists, they had taken my scene description, taken what they're going to say, but the layout they'd completely thrown out and done something that was different and better. And I was like, oh,
Hmm.
right, visual thinkers. These year it's collaborative. And I love that it is such a collaborative form generally. You can get so much more than some of its parts. So when I write a script, it's not a recipe where you're supposed to follow it. It's more of here's a page, there's 5 panels on it, do whatever you want with those 5 panels, but here's what's happening in them, and here's what the characters are saying. And if you want, we can merge a panel, we can cut one, we can move to the next page, whatever you think is best. Bring yourself to this. Don't feel like I'm going to be upset that you mess with my
Hmm.
beautiful words, because that's not the case. This is not a recipe. This is the beginning of a story that we'll get to tell
Right.
together.
Right. So that's what I understand the classic Marvel method was, where the writers would be like, here's the words, here's what we're probably gonna say, and like go artist, be artists and give us a visual masterpiece.
Well, the classic Marvel method was even stranger, where say Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on Fantastic Four, Stan would say, "Okay, let's have a story where they do this. They discuss the story for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then the artist Kirby would go and draw the whole thing, and then Stan will go in and basically fill in the words in the bubbles." So it's much more collaborative in that sense. Very few people do work that way these days because it is a lot of back and forth, and also Kirby was kind of a special case. Most artists have enough on their plate drawing the comic. They don't need to break down the plot and break down how each page works and stuff. We can just,
Hmm.
I try to do as much work for the artist as I can, because I absolutely have the easy job in comics. It takes 10 seconds to say on this page, Batman fights 100 ninjas. That'll take all day to draw. So the more I can do in the script to make their job easy, that's what I'll try to do.
Right. That's a great example. Unless they're fighting in the dark, then it's just a couple white
Yeah.
eyes and outline of a fist and
If you really like your artist, you say they're fighting in the dark, and then they love you forever.
that's fantastic. Um, So before the new Lower Decks book that comes out, though, you've got another Lower Decks book from Titan, I believe, which is the Choose Your Own Way or Warp Your
Yeah, I
Own
think
Way.
that's Warp Your Own Way. I believe that's also IDW. They
Is
may
it
be,
IDW?
I think so. Maybe
I think
Titan's
you're right, only
publishing it,
because
but I
like
think
I kept confusing it for just like a straight comic book, but it's got significantly more pages than like a normal comic book would have.
yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
200 pages, 198, I believe.
right.
Interactive storytelling done in comics, done to lower decks. It is a wild book, and I was so pleased they let me do it, because it's it's never easy to do a choose your own path sort of book, especially in comics.
Hmm.
And they're also a huge pain to edit. Like I wrote it. I'm comfortable in this form. I've written choose your own choosable path adventures. I did adaptations of Shakespeare. To Be or Not to Be was Hamlet. Romeo and or Juliet was my version of that. So I'm familiar with the form. I'm happy to do it. But then what you end up with is an interactive script. So I sent them a flat version in a Word document. I sent them an HTML file they could play through themselves to sort of just play through the script and see what happens. I sent them a map showing the different versions of the story and what they were all doing. There's a lot of complexity, but it's also a really fun uh, just form to play in. And especially with Star Trek, I was able, without spoiling stuff, to work the form of this graphic novel into the story of the graphic novel. So the fact that you're
Hmm.
making choices, the fact that in most of these interactive books you die often, feeds into
Right.
what's happening in the story. I'm
Yeah,
really
I
excited for this book. I
remember.
think it's really,
Yeah,
really cool.
I remember reading the classic Choose Your Own Adventures series when I was a kid and doing the thing where you keep your
The
fingers
fingers,
like, yeah, the
yep.
fingers, and then um the first like couple, like you make the wrong choice and you've read like 4 pages and somehow you're dead already.
Yep.
And I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna read it again to get a better story, and I'll be sure not to take that choice there. Which, of course, as a kid, you don't realize that you're learning, like, that's like remember your place, remember story elements to call back to them, and
Yep.
um, it's just such a great idea
Well,
to
they also have
include.
some. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say the other thing that is really interesting. I found this doing Romeo and or Juliet and To Be or Not to Be was that the interactive book, as popularized by Choose Your Own Adventure and Choose Co-Publishing, uh, generally skews younger. They're books for
Hmm.
kids, and people tend to think that interactivity means for kids and the second person means for kids, or you do this, you do that. It all sort of has a whiff of juvenilia about it, which means you don't see a lot of books for older readers done in that style. And there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do. There's a lot of like critical theory around it yet.
Hmm.
One of the things I was really interested in was this idea of the meta narrative, where when you say choose your own adventure, it's a lie because you're not choosing your own adventure. You're choosing from a set of adventures that I've pre-chosen for you in this story. And because you are pre-choosing what happens by putting the choices in the book, you're also describing a narrative space that the reader or player can explore. And the shape of that narrative space is also telling you a story. What choices work, what choices kill you, all this stuff is a conversation the book has with the reader as they're going through it more than once.
Hmm.
And that's really interesting how the structure of the choice can inform the theme of the story or the player's experience through the story. So there's a lot of pretty esoteric theory that I'm really interested in general, and was happy to sort of use in this interactive Star Trek comic book.
Right. Some authors have done, what do they call them, like companion blog posts or something like that. Is that something that you're going to end up doing for these warp your own way kind of books, where you say, look, let's talk about like the nuts and bolts of this whole like concept?
I hadn't considered it, but it's not a bad idea. Um,
I mean,
yeah,
could you do
maybe.
it for me?
Maybe. I
Yeah,
think I have to wait a bit because it's by necessity when you're talking about it from that structure point of view, you're spoiling it, and
right.
I'd hate to have people have the book's experience ruined that way or revealed that way. But yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah. I one more question about that book too is, what is your preferred methodology for building these interactive stories?
So when I was doing my first ones with the Shakespeare books I mentioned
Hmm.
before that I had tried to do an interactive book and it completely failed because it was too big. You'd reach a choice and every choice branches into two, three, four different choices. And I had no idea where this story was going or what I was even doing here. That just felt like a book without any end. And by doing the Shakespeare adaptations, that gave me a spine of the story. We know that
Hmm.
Romeo is going to fall in love with Juliet and they're going to make some really bad decisions and die. And so that gives you one path through the book. And it's a privileged path because it's a story we know, but it's a spine for the decision tree that branches off of it. So for this book, I didn't have that spine, but what I did have was a lot of experience in building these sorts of stories and knowing the kind of things I wanted to have. So it is, I have a vague idea of the larger shape of the story, but a lot of it is exploration where I will just write a scene and put in choices. And if they're interesting, I'll follow the most interesting ones. And if it goes somewhere cool, great. We've got a choice. If it doesn't, we'll just prune that node of the decision tree and it never existed. So it's I know writers talk a lot about plotting or pantsing, plotting it out, doing it by the seat of your pants. Normally I
Hmm.
plot, but for an interactive story, a lot of it is see what happens, see where it takes you. Because they're very easy books to prune and edit. You just three choices become two, become no choice at all. We just go to the next page. So
Hmm.
it lets you sort of explore as you go. And with the thing I found was so joyful, I guess, in writing this one was that by having seen every hour of Star Trek that it was possible to watch, except for one, um, it just had this depth of knowledge and possibility and stories and tropes and the universe to explore while writing
Hmm.
the book, that it never felt like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? I don't have any ideas. It was more like, I have so much I could do here. What's the coolest thing to have happen? Which is fun.
So you're writing these out on just like a text file on your computer? Are you doing post-it notes, or is there
Yeah,
a
don't
piece of
use a text file.
software?
Yeah, I started with just a flat text file, and that was a mistake. And I there's a open source software called Twine that is meant for it's designed really for online interactive stories. What it does let you do is put words in boxes and draw lines between those boxes for choices. And
Mhm.
so I used that 12 years ago for my first interactive book, and I used a much improved, much more stable, much more reliable version for this. So it lets you see a map. It lets you, for me, I use the X axis for where we are in the story and the Y axis for the character we're controlling or some other element of the narrative. And
Mhm.
it let me be able to orient the story in a two-dimensional map that I could then go through as I built it. It's
Yeah, I'm definitely
way
going to
more
want that
complex than
blog
it needs to
post
be.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely going to want that blog post now, just like to pick your brain about how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
And we'll give it like 6 months to a year, and I'll come back to you and ask you where it's at.
All right. We have an accord.
Yes. So the comic book series that comes out after that is called Lower Decks. The
Yes.
mini series that you did before was called Lower Decks, which is a tradition for the Next Generation comic book series that I believe it was DC that did it, where they did a mini series that was called Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then
Hmm.
they did an ongoing series that did nearly 100 issues.
Yes.
Do you have an issue goal of your own, and why didn't you put a subtitle in one of those?
That's a good question. Good two-part question. I am very modest in my issue goals. I want to hit six. Um, Six feels like a nice statement of this is what the stories can be. I've done log runs before. Squirrel Girl was 5 years, 58 issues. Fantastic Four, we're on issue. I think I'm writing issue 34, 33 right now. So I've been in that long run space, but I've never called a shot like that to be like, this is gonna run for 100 issues
Right,
because I don't. I mean, I'd love to keep doing it for as long as I can and for as long as it's fun, but I always feel like the least complimentary compliment you can give is long running. Like Dinosaur Comics is 23 years old. If all you can say is the long running series Dinosaur Comics,
hmm,
it just says it's been there for a while, right? Like I want to keep doing it while
right,
it's good and while I'm having fun, but longevity for longevity's sake doesn't really appeal to me. So I never try to shoot for it.
right. So, but if IDW asked you to keep the helm, and the fans love what you're doing, we could be looking at another like 20-year dynasty here, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I just said. So yeah.
Well, it would be fantastic to see I believe it would be a third like long running like main what like a main series running from IDW, because right now we have just Star Trek by itself, and then Star Trek Defiant, and it'll be nice to have a third one that comes out, and then eventually hopefully we get a fourth one, so that every week during the month we have,
That'd be great.
yeah, a Star Trek book coming out, because there's I think this week and next week there's like no Trek coming out at my comic shop. And
Outrageous.
yeah, well, I got my email today saying like, hey, here's the books that we're pulling for you, and I'm like, all right. So there's Transformers, which is doing fantastic right now,
Hmm.
and there's
Hmm.
a couple other books. I'm like, okay, but I'm like, I really don't like. There's nothing that I need to read like tomorrow. So do I
Gonna
need to
make
be
the
there
trip for Star
tomorrow?
Trek.
And yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
ultimately, I chose a doctor because they were right next to my local comic shop, and I need to go over there for some labs tomorrow. So like, I'm gonna get my books anyways. But that's probably the nerdiest admission I'll make tonight.
that's great. I mean, I think it's possible that they could have a long running series. There's the thing with Star Trek in general and Lower Decks in particular is that it is such a wide range of places you can go and stories you can tell, and especially with lower decks where they can, dip their toe into something more voyagery and then do little Deep Space Nine stuff or play in this world that we saw once in 1967. And
Mm.
it all feels lower decks in a way that, there are some Star Trek stories that do not feel like Deep Space Nine,
Hmm.
but I feel like everything is in the domain of lower decks, which is great, especially as a writer. It feels like you can just go anywhere and do anything in Star Trek.
Right. Well, they've really set themselves up for success with that, with having the characters being interested in the things that they've like made them interested in. It's a
Mm-hmm.
good vehicle for like, oh, hey, the characters are going to be interested in this week, but like this specific thing this week because Tendi found out that there were pirates on Earth, and now they're on Earth doing some sort of Ahab
Pirate
thing.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good pitch.
Yeah. See, that's the easy part though, right? Is the pitch. The actual writing of a thing is where I've always struggled. And after struggling with like the idea that like maybe I could be a writer one day, and I was like, no, no, maybe I could talk to other writers, or
Yeah.
talk to writers and artists and that kind of stuff. And that's working out fantastic for me because I'll be nakedly honest in that like my website is only there for me to get the opportunity to have conversations with people that are far more creative than me.
I don't think it's a creativity thing. Like I think it's, especially interviewing, is a skill like any other where
This.
uh and you're talking to writers, which classically are, we didn't get into writing because we were so good at public speaking and thinking on our feet. We got into writing because it gives us all the time in the world to craft the perfect sentence and make us look really, really smart.
That's true, but I would give a counterpoint to that is that everyone that I've spoken to, they're talking about things that they really love, mostly about their own work and about Star Trek. And people love to talk about like the things they know about and the things they care about.
That's
And
true.
uh, there's never like a want for conversation, right? Because if there's ever a pause, you just say, "Oh, hey, what's the next project you're working on?" And every writer has at least 15 irons in the fire,
You've cracked the
which is
code.
a good segue to ask, what's coming up for you?
This is a hard question for me because a lot of things I have are secret.
Oh, the
I
dreaded
don't,
NDAs.
I have to remember what's public. There's some new Fantastic Four comics coming, obviously, and the stuff I'm doing there is actually very Star Trek inspired, where
Hmm.
Fantastic Four are scientific explorers, and I just really pictured them as these four weirdos who roll into town, solve a problem, find a problem, solve a problem, and leave, which is basically an away mission to a weird
Hmm.
planet where we fix the problem on the weird planet or learn more about ourselves as we do it, and then go on to the next place. So it feels, I realized only after like writing Fantastic Four and Lower Decks at the same time, oh, there's a lot of connections here.
Hmm.
There's stuff that you can do. You can, like, they're not the same, obviously, and there's Fantastic Four stories and Lower Deck stories, Star Trek stories. They're not identical, but there's some parallels, which is interesting. Um, Beyond that, I'm working on the Iron Man game coming up in a couple years from Motive, which is fun because that's a big writer's room. We're all working together. Very different from comics. Comics is you sit alone in a room, you write your script, you send off the artist, they send back pages. 3 months later, the book is out. Writing a AAA video game, this game will come out for years. Like
Hmm.
it's we're examining the story, we're kicking the tires, we're trying different things, see what works better. It's so much more um, time to really craft something versus comics where you just have to run and learn as you're doing. So look forward to that several years from now. And uh, yeah, beyond that, I think my latest book is How to Take Over the World, which is comedy nonfiction about doing comic book schemes in real life to literally pull off stuff like Doctor Doom would be doing. So lots of irons in the fire, as you say.
I do like those instruction manuals that like how to restart the world after an apocalypse. The World Wars. Was that World War? No, it was the zombie apocalypse guidebook that
Hmm.
same author did the World War Z. Because it always gives you the impression of like, oh, hey, maybe I could make it in that world, or maybe I could
Yeah.
be Doctor Doom. When in reality, I'd be in a prison pretty quickly.
Well, I wrote a book called How to Invent Everything. And the premise was it was a repair guide for time machines. So if you went back in time, your time machine broke, this guy
Ah,
would tell you how to fix it. And the repair guide is like, look, time machines are too complicated. You're never going to fix it. Instead, it's actually easier to try to rebuild civilization from scratch. So here's how you do that instead. And then it's a guide to technology and science. What I found in researching it and writing it and then having the book come out was that a lot of people had shared this fantasy slash anxiety of going back in time and being a sucky time traveler and being like, hey, the future's great. We have computers and penicillin. And they'd say, great. How do you invent computers and penicillin? And you'd be like, I don't know. Sorry. I just know that they're rad. But also, I found that it made me feel like a much more competent person just to exist in the world and know, like,
mm.
okay, so now I understand like farming and crop rotation and how yeast works and how to find isolate antibiotics and things like that. Just in terms of like baseline competency for being a person moving through the world, it felt very empowering in a weird way.
Now, did any of that knowledge that you gained from that book turn into what I call like just like hated knowledge? Like you just like hate that you had to know something. In my case, I can tell you the exact mechanisms of the internal workings of a specific brand of carpet cleaner because I had to take the stupid thing apart so many times and found out that they actually made the main vacuum mechanism out of non-treated metal, so it rusts when it gets wet on a
Oh,
carpet
great.
cleaner. Yeah,
Terrific.
so I was like, well, these guys, I'm never going to buy one of these again, but because I know how to take it apart and put it together so easily now, I'm not going to go spend another $100 on my carpet cleaner. So yeah, I've got this thing, and I'm like, once that one bit breaks, then I'm never going back to this brand.
Yeah.
So did you have anything from that book that you ended up like wishing you just didn't know how it worked?
Um, Not really. I remember learning about night soil, which, if you're not familiar, is a way to fertilize crops. If you don't have any animals, you can use human feces, but it's a horrible way because their diseases are very
Right.
transferable. Um, but I do often have that, what do you call it? Hated knowledge,
Yeah, I
unwanted
just
knowledge.
like I don't think that's a good term for it. We should come up with a better one. But just like
Yeah.
it's not forbidden knowledge. It's just knowledge I wish I didn't have to know. Right?
Yeah.
Like I
I've had
just
that for
like
like fixing tech problems or like some weird, obscure
right.
programming problem that I learned how to fix and then
Yeah,
forgot about
or
it and
something that
encountered two
like
years later and was like, ah, this thing.
yeah, like I used to be a data analyst for a real estate portal, and there were some problems that would take darn near a week to figure out like what the problem was, and then you would never have to ever figure that out again because it turns out it was just like someone like goofed on some code from another company and they were sending us bad data that was interacting with a goof on our side, and
Right.
you're like, okay, well now I know how to deconstruct this entire bit of code that we're never going to use again because now we're moving over to Pearl or something like that. You're like, ah, using up
Yeah.
all my brain cells I could have for Star Trek.
That's good. But it's like it's a skill you can use down the road, like the act of diagnosing, the act of figuring what the problem was,
Right.
and then you're like, "Yep, this is solved, and I will never think about this again. I can just erase it from my mind."
True, true.
Yeah.
Um, so I have run out of notes on my notepad here because everything I had was Star Trek related, and then went off on a tangent about Project Wonderful, and I was so excited about that. I was like, oh wow, it's that guy.
I'm thrilled.
Um, so what else are you up to that you'd like to talk about?
Um, there's something I would like to talk about, but it is not announced yet. I can't talk about it yet.
Oh,
Um, I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
so
Um,
let's talk about not being able to talk about stuff then. How do you actually track what you can and can't talk about?
the easiest thing to do is to not track it and just, I'm serious, you don't track
No,
it
it's true.
and you just mentally tick off when you've seen someone else talking about it because that means it's public. And then you
Right.
can look at that article and be like, okay, they have announced this or they've talked about this. Um, it's a little bit risky. I almost talked about a thing I wasn't supposed to today because someone had leaked an element of it. I know it hadn't yet been
Hmm.
officially announced. I was like, oh, okay, good. Glad to know that I shouldn't be talking about this. But it's both fun and kind of annoying to have all these secrets. It's fun because you're like, oh, I know stuff no one else does. But it's annoying because you're always thinking like, what can I say? Who am I talking to? Like, is this someone from IDW? I can talk about IDW stuff, but I can't talk about this other stuff and blah blah blah. It's nature of the beast.
Right. And particularly working with Marvel, I'm sure their comic side is much less laser focused on keeping spoilers out than the cinematic side of things, but they still have to have like a level of that concern, though, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I know Studios is very much more fastidious about information and who has it and where it goes out. And I can tell
Hmm.
you, as the guy writing a comic called Fantastic Four, I do not know what is happening in the movie Fantastic Four because they are keeping it a secret.
Right. Man, I have an entire line of questioning about that setup that I think I'm going to skip for today, only because it gets into like author usage and the just less rosy stuff that
Mm,
goes into it. Okay, so I'll say that like for some of the movies that have come before, they've used author work that admittedly is like it's nearly universally like contract for hire, right? Like
work for
you're
hire,
hired
yeah.
to do this, yeah, work for hire. You do this thing for this one thing, and then like they own it and they get to do whatever they want with it. Um, for better or worse, would you be more excited to see your work up on the screen? A la like Thor Ragnarok had a whole bunch of ones that always come to mind to me, like when they were doing um hold on, was it Ragnarok or no? It was Love and Thunder, where he was going around killing gods, and they had like that whole
Mm,
montage where it was direct lifts, or like it's not even a lift if it's the like they own it, but like direct
homage.
yeah, yeah. That, like I would say they used the comic books as the storyboards and then filmed it as such. Would you be more excited to see that up there without your name, or would you like obviously you want to see your name there, but or not see it?
Yeah, I feel like they've gotten better in the past 10, 20 years of like putting names in there in the special
Mhm.
things. So that you can see like, oh, they've been inspired by my work or they've homaged my work and then they've given me a shout out. Um, I've never had it happen, so I can't really say from experience, but I think the ideal version of it is they use your work and they say, hey, this was work for hire, but it's great. We like it. Here's some more money. Here's
Mhm.
some recognition. It's I think a lot of that honestly comes from the fans, people hearing stories about Schuster, Simon and Schuster, not Simon and Schuster. Oh my God, Superman creators, Siegel and
Yeah,
Schuster,
Siegel and Schuster, Jerry
Simon and
Schuster.
Schuster. My goodness,
Yeah.
take away my comics card. Siegel and Schuster having, living in poverty and all this stuff.
Hmm.
And it's a bad look when someone who did important work on these characters is struggling to make ends meet and your movies are making all this money. And people have recognized that's a bad look and they've been doing a lot better about compensating people this way, even though they don't legally have to because it is work for hire. Um, I think it's the gracious thing to do and the right thing to do. So to answer your question, my ideal version is they use the work, they credit me, and they give me some money for it.
That
But
would be the ideal version.
yeah,
But it would still be interesting, like just to fanboy out a little bit, like just to see like your thoughts that like went to a great comic book, but then also ended up on the silver screen, and now millions of people are watching that around the world, and it ends up in a much wider audience, because
yeah. I mean,
there's always that like that trail that DC has done really well with, where like at the end of all the DC books, at least ever since Gunn started working with them, it always ends with like go to a comic shop and buy these books, because if you like this story,
yeah,
you're going to love what you find at the shops.
and that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, if they did that, I would hope that they would uh, go through that process of adaptation that we are talking about, where it's not just here's the thing you saw before, but now there's live action people doing it.
Hmm.
But here's that idea, that concept made to live as if it was born in this medium. Because
Right.
that I think is the more interesting thing for me, less of, oh, here's something that I wrote in the past, now it's on the screen, and more like, here's an idea that I was exploring, and here's how it would come to life in this new form. Because I mean, I'm a language guy. I have a couple, I guess one, I have a master's degree in linguistics, computational linguistics, and for me, the line between language and thought is really, really cool. And that gets to the core of like expressing ideas and the tools we use to express ideas. And that's all there in adaptation of like,
Hmm.
given the tools I have in this medium, how can I best express this idea? That's really, really cool to me. So I'd love to see something like that, or something I did.
Yeah, the concept of saying words and putting things in people's minds is a science fiction concept that like I've run into a couple different times where if you hear the wrong thing, you can be like brainwashed just from like hearing it because it's like something that like active reactivates or like creates a picture in your brain that you just can't control. And
The fear warp
yeah,
hypothesis, yeah.
right. Yeah, and just the idea that you're able to do that, on a fairly regular basis through the comics and the books that you write is it's exciting.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's, if you were to describe reading in a sci-fi context, people who didn't have the technology, it sounds crazy. Here's something that
Hmm.
you hold in your hands, and you will hear a voice in your head, and that voice will tell you the words I wanted to say. That's what literacy is. It's very intimate, and it's a very special invitation to be in someone's head like that. I think that's what
Hmm.
attracts me to writing, is you get to uh, be with these people in a way that most don't. And it's not, it's not mind control. You can just say something and they can reject what you're saying. But if you do it right, you can make them feel something and maybe change their mind about something because of how you made them feel. Like there's this idea of books being empathy machines where it lets you experience the world as someone else would experience it. And I think there's something to that. I think that's, I mean, movies are the same way. Any sort of narrative, any sort of story. So much of Star Trek is about going to a place and having an impression, and that initial impression being wrong, and you
Hmm.
have to understand how others see this situation before you can actually understand the situation, and you know that's a pretty powerful lesson in not just thinking about yourself and not just thinking about your own advantages, but trying to see things as others would. So that's what I think reading is.
So having the connection between uh, writing these long form novels and the academic achievements that you have, and now your involvement with Lower Decks, do you see the possibility, not so much like you writing one, but a Lower Decks longer form book that's just written?
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, I'd love to see that. I think the thing that Lower Decks does structurally so well is it doesn't say this is an animated show taking place in its own animated universe where nothing really counts. It says, no, this is Star Trek. And you'll have characters on the live action shows who show up here, and vice versa with the Strange New Worlds crossover. So that I think uh, that willingness to say this is not less than because it's animated, this is equal to everything else, means that I don't think these characters are married to the medium in which they
Mhm.
originated. I think there would be amazing lower decks prose novels.
Because I think, and I may be wrong about this, but just off the top of my head, I think Lower Decks is the only television series that hasn't had any long form books.
I'd be surprised if
Because
that stays the same for much longer.
well, they're loading the canon up with content here with the Academy series, and then whatever show it is that Tanya Newsom is putting together with the workplace comedy that I'm really hopeful, like that. I believe it's live action, but I think they're gonna like. I'm really hopeful that they're gonna bring some lower decks characters off of
Be amazing.
animation into like real life. And I'm really hoping
That'd be
it's
great.
Tendi because green ladies on Star Trek, that's my kryptonite.
You picked the right sci-fi franchise.
Right? Yeah. But like, do I like Star Trek because of that, or do I like green ladies because of Star Trek? Like, who knows?
Who
Like
can say?
chicken and the egg, right?
Yeah.
Could be either one. But yeah, she's the only one. Her and Badgie are the only ones that I've gotten Funko Pops of because Funko Pops are everywhere, and God bless
Mhm.
them, everyone loves them. But I recognized very early that my collector's mentality was being itched in like
Yep.
three or four different ways by those things. And I was like, oh, that's dangerous.
You got to
Like
protect yourself.
I'll be living in a house of Funko if I'm not careful because they number all their releases. So that gets me on the
There's the
like
completionist scratch.
right. I
Yep.
have I have 1 through 10. That's perfect. Like oh, now there's 10 more. I guess I'll get those too. That's how Eagle Moss got me because they were doing Starship releases. It was a
Oh, I'm.
subscription,
Yep.
and I got all the subscription ones, and I saved myself a couple dollars because they started doing like bonuses and specials, and I was like, they're not numbered, so they don't count.
Well, they wouldn't
But
ship to Canada, so that's what saved me.
oh well, Fan Home is doing some now, and
I signed up with their email list, and they're like, "Hey, you should sign up for this." And I was like,
yeah,
"Okay,
I did see some people asking if they were going to ship to Canada or not because they will to UK and they will to the US.
yeah."
Maybe you can get a dealer to just was that Man and Mill or something like that that we'll get it here in the US and then like turn it around, send it back to you for another 5-10 bucks because
Well,
those ships are looking gorgeous and they're doing all the stuff that Eagle Moss never got to release because they went out
I
so
know. The
quickly.
line I drew in the sand. I just do well, I mostly just do the XLs, and just for ships named Enterprise, and so that cuts out a lot. But even so, Eagle Moss never got to the F or the G.
Well, they did have two different Fs
But not
because
not
they
in
had
XLs.
yeah, not in XLs because they had one with the Star Trek Online
Yep.
template and one with the television template. But yeah, they were the smaller ones. And I got
Yeah.
those because like I already had the other 15 Enterprises,
Yeah.
so why not
Throw them
keep
in.
going there? But
I
they did do a Cerritos that is gorgeous.
Yes, I have that
You
one too.
have okay,
With
yeah,
an exception, with ships in Enterprise or ships I've written for.
right,
I
yeah.
did that on.
Yeah, I got two of the lower decks ones, the Parliament class and the Cerritos ones, because I was trying to stay away from like their auxiliary stuff because it was just going to be like all this money. But they look so gorgeous on my work desk.
I know they're beautiful, beautiful piece of
Yeah,
model.
yeah. So spaceships. That's now I just need a spaceship that is fully crewed with Orions, trying to make it in the Federation.
I had a friend who was like, "Why are you getting these little ships? Because they're all just circles with tubes attached." And I was like, "Oh no, let me tell you the subtle nuances of flavor between these different arrangements of circles and tubes."
Right. Like, look, this one's got four of them. This
Yeah.
one's got two in like a gull wing, and then this one's got a swoop wing, and then this one's got like a
Completely different.
circle that is a completely ball in the front. Like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, completely different ships.
Yeah, and those XLs really are gorgeous. I don't have any of the XLs. I only got the special edition size ones, which I think are a step down. But I did subscribe to the fan home stuff, and they're going to be shipping XLs once a quarter, I think, or once every
That's
like
awesome.
4 or 5 months.
That's gonna be
But
tons of fun.
yeah, luckily that right now they're holding themselves to just an issue a month.
Hmm.
So right now underneath my bed in my bedroom is just like boxes of Star Trek ships that I don't have the space to
Display.
display them. Right. So like I've got the Enterprise lineage out in a curio cabinet, and that looks fantastic. I love it. But like this wall where this fish tank is behind me, I want to turn that into just like IKEA shelves with LED lights and spaceships and all
Oh, that'd
that.
be
But
great.
yeah, but the fish tanks is on Twitch and it's making me enough money that like I don't want to like get rid of the fish tank, which is a very low sum of money. It's paying for itself. Like it's paying for the fish food and the power that's going into it.
That's
But
perfect.
Yeah, like
I mean,
it's a
having a
self-sustaining
fish
thing.
tank break even is a new invention in human society.
Yeah, I actually I was getting into like streaming like just like video games on Twitch, and it was in here because I've got like a big TV right here, and I was playing on my couch over there, and I looked at the fish tank, and I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if I had a camera on the fish tank and the fish were playing the video games? And I could act like I was a fish. Well, that lasted one night because it was a goofy concept. But like
Yeah.
setting up the camera, I was like, this actually is an okay concept. So I was like, is anyone else doing 24-hour streams on Twitch? And the naive me, I didn't know about all the live streams that they had that were just like 24/7. That's all they did.
Yeah.
And after about a month of me just being like in random categories, Twitch actually created a zoos and animals category. So that's like there's a whole bunch of like
Made your own
aquariums and
category.
zoos, and yeah, so I'm in the same category as the Monterey Aquarium. So they have more followers than me for obvious reasons. They have penguins. So
Oh well. Well,
yeah, yeah. I'm not Mr. Popper here. I don't have that those kind of resources. But yeah, it's been a fun adventure. Like just setting up the fish tanks camera and like having an extra streaming computer in here, and
hmm
that computer, of course, is on 24/7. It's been going about 2 or 3 years now. So we've been having issues with it's a laptop, so the battery dies every now and then. So I'm like, oh, another $30 that the fish have already paid for. So it's worth it.
Fish are buying new batteries. It's great.
Yeah, it is. Um, so people can find you on the internet, obviously. Do you have any new projects that you want to plug before we call it a night?
No, the other thing I mentioned is like ryannorth.ca is my personal site that has links to all the stuff I've done, all the stuff I'm doing. But beyond that, I think check out the Lower Decks Warp Your Own Way and the ongoing series launching because I think they'll be, and I'm biased, I think they'll be pretty good.
I think you're onto something with this Star Trek stuff. I think it's got legs. I think that
Yeah.
the franchise is going to go places. All right, man. It was fantastic to talk to you. I really appreciate the time that you gave me tonight.
Yeah, I really appreciate getting to put a name and a voice and a personality to the face I've known for about a decade.
Yeah, it's crazy how things circle back on each other.
Small
Uh,
internet.
or who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
All right, man. I will let you have the rest of the evening.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks again.
All
I
right,
really
take
appreciate you
care.
reaching out.
All right,
Thank you.
good night.
Bye.